In this video, I'm replacing the sensor for my water tank with this new one. So about 2 years ago, roughly, not quite, I created a water pressure sensor thingy that I put inside the water tank. The video for that is part 1 and it's linked right there. And I would recommend go and check that out first because all of the setup and all the code and everything is in that video. And also check out the comments for that video. There's a lot of good stuff there. But it's been almost 2 years. The one I made is starting to go a bit wonky. I'm not trusting it entirely anymore, to be honest. So I bought this particular sensor, which does the same thing. So this is quite a heavy unit. This last bit here, I'll take the cover off, and you drop it in the tank. Now, this is a commercially made one, so I have high hopes. It's set up the exact same way as the one I've already created in terms of how to connect it with Home Assistant and ESP Home. So the board that I'm connecting to, you'll see that in a second, is still the M5 stack, the Atom Light from M5 stack. But I chose this one because it comes in many different configurations. So this one that I've chosen is a 0 to 5 volt output. So the pressure that it generates gives a voltage of 0 to 5 volt. And it has a range of 3 meters. Now the range, and I'm still not entirely sure this is how it's supposed to be interpreted, but the range to me is the depth that it measures. So how deep a body of fluid or water can you have? And they come in all different configurations. So you can have a 5 meter depth range with a 5 meter cable. You have 1 meter depth range with a 5 meter cable, 10 meter depth range with a 10 meter cable, etc., etc. And the output can also be 0 to 5 volt, 0 to 10 volt, 0 to 20 or 1 to 20 milliamp, and an R485 or 285, which I'm not entirely sure what that output is. I'm not familiar with that. So there's many options, and I chose 5 meter cable, 3 meter range, because that's a 2 meter roughly tank. And I was thinking that if the range is 3 meters, well, then the voltage 0 to 5 over the 3 meters, it will be with 2 meters, and that's probably right. So if it's 1 meter depth, it'll be a third of the voltage, so 1.66 or thereabouts, right? That's my reasoning. Let's see if that's true. But yeah, that's the device. I'm gonna pull out the old one. I'm gonna put this one in. I'm gonna attach it to the exact same Atom Light that the old one is attached to, with nothing changed, just the same cabling. And that should just give us value into Home Assistant. And then I'll show you a bit more about how it's set up and a couple of tricks to make it work better. So that's the old crusty one. You see it's a bit gooey. That's why we have water filters in the country, because water is full of, well, gutter stuff. And the cable, it's a bit mangled. It's the one we did almost 2 years ago. As far as we know, it still works, but you can tell that it's a bit of a different standard to, well, this one. So in 2 years, that will be full of gunk as well, but it's probably going to fare better. And here is the actual sensor. So the bottom of it there is probably where you're going to have the sensor pressure thingy. Anyway, we're going to put it in. Yay! So here's the cable coming out of the water tank, and the sensor's in there, and it goes around here. So I got 5 meters of cable, just to have a bit of extra. Goes up here, and it's going into the Atom Light. So let me just zoom in on that for it there. So that is the same Atom Light as I have in the first video that I've linked to. And it's the same connectors, and I've just added these Dupont clips, which are those, and they're a bit annoying to figure out how to attach initially, but they make the connection so much better. The additional thing that we didn't have in the first homemade solution is this here. That is the breather tube for the actual sensor down the bottom of the tank. I think that's important. Yeah, so that's all connected exactly the same way as before. It's the same Atom light. I haven't configured anything differently. Same input, same voltage. So have a look. We'll have a look in Home Assistant and see what it looks like there and if we can get the values in there. So that's exactly what didn't happen because I'm an idiot. What turns out is that the pressure sensor needs 12 volt DC input, which means that that little tiny Atom light can't power it, obviously. Like it can do like nothing, 3 volts or something. So I didn't even think that through. So no, we're not doing that. Instead, what I've decided to do is get a Shelly Uni. I'll give you a better picture of it there. Which is a tiny little board from Shelly, which also do the light fixtures and smart switches and stuff. And this Shelly Uni gives you 2 outputs of power as well as a whole bunch of outputs of all sorts of things. So you can use it for all sorts of things. In this case, I'm going to put 12 volt into it, and then I'm going to put 12 volt out of it to power the thing. And on top, of course, the data is going to come out as a voltage, as an analog signal. That's going to come out on this white wire here as well. And then after that, we can put the Shelly into Home Assistant, which is much easier, I hope. But we'll figure that one out. And it comes in this tiny little box. It's really neat. It's a really cool device. I've been wanting to play with one for a long time. Never considered it in this scenario, but here we are. And also the second thing is that the Atom light just couldn't get Wi-Fi signal out here. So instead, this one has a much better 1 milliwatt Wi-Fi signal, and I have no idea what that means, but that's what it said. So hopefully we get a better Wi-Fi reception and transmission as well. So let's install that, and then we'll go to the next step. Yeah. I've connected the Shelly Uni to the power supply. There's a dog. And that's just an old power supply that I got, like a 12 volt DC. Yes. The cool thing about the Shelly Uni is it accepts both DC and AC, so that's really good. But there's no power coming out of the other end where I need to connect the sensor. So I'm gonna adopt this into the Shelly ecosystem, like I'm gonna adopt it into my network. And then I can probably switch on that power output is what I'm thinking. So I'm going to do that in the web interface. Yeah, so we'll do that next, and then I will hook up the sensor to this and then go into Home Assistant. Well, at least that's the plan. All right. I'm now at the IP address of 192.168.33.1, which is the IP address that this Shelly can be reached on its local network. So of course, I need to connect to the Wi-Fi access point or the Wi-Fi network that it is, there we go, that it is broadcasting. So I'm going to connect to the Shelly Uni something, something, something. And then once I've connected to that, I can then access the Shelly Uni interface on that IP address. I hope that makes sense. So now I'm on the local network of it, so I need to then put it onto my network, my IoT SSID on my Wi-Fi, and here I can connect the Shelly, as it says, to an existing Wi-Fi network. So I put in IoT and the password, save that, and then the Shelly does everything itself, but obviously I'm going to lose connection to it on this IP address because it's no longer what it's got. So I need to go and find what the IP address is. You can see there, the Shelly Uni has now got an IP address of 0.4.249. So that's the one I can use to access the Shelly. So I'm just going to copy that over instead. There we go. And now I can start configuring it and using it properly. So that's how you get it onto the Wi-Fi network. There's also a mobile app that you can do this through. I just like the web interface to show you. Now there's a little icon there, the red icon that says there's a firmware update. So I always tend to update the firmware for the Shelly devices whenever I am touching them. Just a good idea to keep your firmware updated. Now that can become a challenge though when you have many devices. So now it's all ready to use. You can see there's even an ADC voltage coming in, even though nothing's connected, so there's a little bit of a signal. But I can now turn these channel 1 and channel 2 on and off. So let's turn channel 1 on, which means there's now power going to channel 1 on the Shelly Uni, and I can then connect the sensor to that. I'm going to give it a device name because I like good naming. We're going to call this one Shelly Uni House Tank, like that, and then that name will then go through and also into Home Assistant eventually. And that is pretty much all we need to do. You see there's a few settings here we can change. The main thing being the ADC range. You can then make it monitor up to 12 volt or up to 30 volt. I think that just gives it a little bit more accuracy if you know you're going to be under 12 volt, I'm guessing. So we might want to change that a bit later on. But for now, we have set up the Shelly Uni. It's ready to be used. So let's go back to the water tank and see if we can actually get power out of it to power the pressure sensor in the tank. Yeah, anyway, not hard to do. Shelly Uni, love it. So here's what we ended up with. So there's the cable coming out of the tank for the pressure sensor, and that goes down here and around, and comes up again here. So that's the output there. And so you can see that it's powered in there. There's the powering for the pressure sensor. And the power is coming from this brick over here, which is just an old brick I found, an old power brick, which works just fine. And we cut the end of it off and put it into that bit there. So that's now powering both the Shelly Uni and the pressure sensor. And then the Shelly Uni is getting the signal from that white wire going down there. There's a white one. It's a little bit tricky to see, but it goes down into here. That's the Shelly Uni there, which is now connected to the internet and the network. And then that gets a voltage input, which we can then read in Home Assistant, like I showed you just before. Now, the only thing that I couldn't get to work is that the outputs on this, which is at the end here, there's two voltage outputs for button 1 and 2. These sensors are supposed to be connected to that, which is actually, we put it into here to make it easier to show. But there's no voltage coming out. I am suspecting it may be because this green wire here, focus, the green wire is a ground wire, and maybe when that's not connected, no voltage is delivered. So for now, we've hooked them directly into the power supply, which worked just fine. And then the signal is just going to the Shelly Uni. So if that is correct, I can't find any documentation about it. Let me know in the comments. I would love to do this as intended by Shelly, but so far this is what we've got. And by the way, yes, I'm aware that there are some bare wires there and there. This is not the final installation, it was just to show you on the video. They are going to be ended properly with tape or otherwise, but for now this is working. But now we have values going into the Shelly, so now we can put them into Home Assistant, and then we can create a water tank measure level thingy on the dashboard. Yay! So now we got voltage coming into the Shelly Uni, as you can see on the screen here. The ADC voltage is the signal coming in on that white wire from the Shelly Uni via the pressure sensor, so I can measure that. Other things I can do now, I've changed the name, and I can turn these channels on and off. But yeah, the Shelly Uni, brilliant device. I wish I'd used it earlier, but here we are. Now the next thing obviously is to get this data into Home Assistant, not only so I can visualize it to how much water is in the tank, but also so further down the track I can automate things based on water level, you know, get alerts or automatically top it up, which we have a function to do possibly. So let's jump into Home Assistant, and you can see it's all a bit of a, you know, here I don't have any sensor here for the house tank, so I'm gonna fix that, and there's no voltage because that was the old system, so we'll fix that too. But first, let's integrate the Shelly, which is very easy. So go into my integrations, and down under Shelly, you can see there's a bunch of them. Now, you can use MQTT for Shelly as well to discover topics, etc. And I recommend that if you have a lot of them, like more than 10, I'd say, or something. I don't have that yet, so I'm using the integration that comes with Home Assistant, which is what we'll do again. So you just add another integration, you search for Shelly, There it is. And then that adds one Shelly device at a time as a separate integration. So you get an integration for each. The MQTT obviously is a queue network that runs more than just the Shellys. But that's a different video completely. Just be aware that that is also an option. So put in the IP for that particular device. So that's the one that we just saw. We can see that, you know, where we were on the other tab. I can submit that. It goes, hey, we found it, success. Do you want to put it somewhere? I don't actually have an outside type thing, but you can put it in an area, outside type area, but you can do that if you want. There we go. And now under here, you see Shelly, it just added the Shelly Uni house tank. One device, 11 entities. So let's go and have a look at that. So now I have pretty much the same things in Home Assistant as I had in the Shelly. So if you go back to the Shelly, you can see 2 buttons here, channel 1 and 2. There's an ADC voltage. That's here, channel 2, and the tank pressure sensor button, ADC voltage, and then there's a few other things like rebooting, 2 entities not shown. You can see beta, firmware updates, those sort of things you can do as well. But I'm just worried now about the voltage. In this video, we just want the voltage. Now, the issue here is that if you look at the voltage, if I click on the sensor, and there's more data here because to make this more interesting, I did add it earlier. So you can see here there's a bit more data. See how it goes up and down all the time? So the pressure sensor obviously fluctuates ever so slightly, but that would mean that the water level would go up and down all the time. If you have automations and it's right around that level, that could cause a bit of havoc. And also just my OCD says that's not accurate. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make this a smooth curve. I want to iron out this voltage, right? And we do that with a median value. So the median, not an average, but a median, which means that I think you ignore the highest and lowest points on a graph, and then you get sort of the average values of the averages kind of thing. But the median is what I want to use. You see it just changed again to 1.7. So it keeps changing. Now to use a median value, I am going to use a statistics sensor. I'm using Bing. Yeah, I know. Welcome to Bing. So the statistics sensor for Home Assistant is a calculator sensor. So it requires another sensor as input, right? And then you can calculate statistic values on those, on that input. So in this case, I'm going to use it's down here, a median output for it. So data in, calculate median, that becomes another sensor, statistics sensor. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. So if I go into file editor here, and I'm going to go to my configuration.yaml file, and here's a bunch of the things I've already got set up. Your configuration YAML file might be bigger, smaller, look different, the same. If I go down to this section here, it says sensors, right? So I want to add another sensor. I want to add a statistics sensor. So I'm just going to copy the code so that you don't have to sit there and watch it. Me type and I won't get it wrong. So if I go down here and I add another sensor, so you can see here that we have platform statistics. So just like up here, platform template. And I'm going to name it house water tank level median voltage. So I like long names to be descriptive. Choose whatever name you want. The entity ID that comes into it, sensor Shelly Uni house tank ADC. So where do I get that from? So if I just go and open another instance of Home Assistant so we don't lose what we just did, and I go down to settings, and I go to my entities here, and I search for Shelly, it'll filter them, and you can see here, Shelly Uni house tank ADC, and there's the sensor name. Right, so that's the entity ID rather for that sensor. So the sensor friendly name, the entity ID, sensor.shelly_uni, etc. So that's where I'm getting that from. Oh. So that's the name I'm putting in here as the entity ID of the input. Yeah, makes sense. The state characteristic, so that's what value am I going to calculate on this? Median. And then you always have to give a statistics sensor either a max age, it says in here, right at the top. Here, characteristics. Pay close attention to the right configuration of sampling size and or max age. You have to have one of them or both. Sampling size says how many values do I want to use for this calculation, or max age is how old is the oldest calculation I want to use. So I'm going to use max age. And the reason I'm using that is that I want to get the median over the last 2 hours. Because if I'm filling the water tank or it's emptying, I don't want it to be 24 hours before I see any sort of change. I want it to be relatively quick, but not too quick. So 2 hours works for me. And then the precision is how many decimal places. Now, I'm only going to get 2. I tried with 4 and I like 4, but the Shelly Uni actually only gives me 2. The old system in the first video, part 1, from the Atom 5, the ESP32 board on the Atom 5 stack, M5 stack, Atom Light, geez, naming, that gave me 6 decimal places. I'm just going to get 2, but I'm going to leave it at 4. You can choose what you want. And that's it. So now I need to save it. Okay, so now I have the values coming in. So if I just go back here to settings, you can see it again. And we go to the entities and we search for the Shelly Uni and the info. There it is. Now you can see that's the value I'm getting in. And then now for the median, which is using that value, there's the median voltage. And there's the median. Again, I've created it a little bit before, so we had some values to look at. So that's right when I created it. Obviously, there's not much data, so it was much higher because at that point, the latest was very high. And then you can see it smooths out over time. So this dip here is actually because I used some water, and now it hasn't used any water overnight here. So it's all flat at 1.72. And that means I have a stable value that I can now show my water level with. That makes sense? Shelly Uni gets the raw data from the water pressure sensor, puts it in the Home Assistant via the Shelly integration. That voltage is then going up and down a bit. I use a statistics sensor to calculate the median, which is what you're seeing here. I can then use that median to show how much water visually is in the tank. I hope you're following me. So the last step I have to do in the configuration YAML file is to have to add a template. So you can see here I already have a bunch of templates for the water tanks already. I'm going to replace the one that are for the house because now we're using a different sensor. So I'm just going to copy across this. I'm going to delete the one that says house tank liters 2. Don't ask why it's 2. Naming's hard. So I'm going to replace that. There we go. So this bit here, just look at the house tank liters Shelly. So this value template, that's another sensor you can set up in Home Assistant. A template, they're really cool because you can do calculations on them and get one value out. I want the number of liters of water. So I'm going to set the voltage, that's a variable. I'm going to set that to the state of my median, right? So that's the input, the median value we just created down here. That's a statistics one. And then I'm just going to make it a float, so I get the value type. And then I'm going to take that voltage, I'm going to divide it by 2. So I'm assuming at this point that 2 volts is full. Right? That's my assumption. It might not be right. I might have to adjust that later. Maybe it's 2.1, maybe it's 2.2, maybe it's 1.9, whatever. But it's roughly right for this. And then I'm going to times that by the number of liters that I know is in the tank. And then round it. Right, so that's how I'm going to get the actual water out of it. And then I just get a sensor here called house tank liter Shelly that I can then put on my dashboard. My unit of measurement is liters, and here's my friendly name that I can see in Home Assistant as well. Right? So if I save that, and now I'm just going to restart Home Assistant, and that won't take long because editing is magic. All right, restart it. And now we have the data we need. So now we can go back and we can fix the dashboard. So you may have already, actually give me some ideas in the comments on how you would configure these dashboards. Because I always find these tricky. Like what is the actual, what's the best way to put this? Anyway, I'm going to just stick with what I've got. I'm going to edit this to have the proper house tank liters, not 2 because that doesn't exist anymore. This one here. There we go. Yay. And that is about right. I just checked it before. That is roughly where it's at in terms of level. So that works. And then down here, the voltage, which I like looking at because I can see, trends. I'm just going to median. There we go. I'm going to save that. So Now we fixed the values. There's just one more here that says it's unavailable, like that. So now we have, and you can see here that the other water sensors I have, they come in via an M5 stack Atom Light, so that's a different board, and you can see the decimal places are much higher. It doesn't really matter, I found. It works. You can see the calculations are really accurate. That's my second version of my water tank sensor. Both are valid. Use whichever one makes sense to you, either the M5 stack or the Shelly Uni. Both are great devices. I like this now for my particular purposes, also because of that Wi-Fi issue. I may have to put an access point out there, another access point, jeepers. But I hope this was helpful. If you have a water tank and you want to install a water pressure sensor monitoring system, this is one way to do it. That's it. Second version of my water tank sensor implementation using the Shelly Uni and a commercial sort of made plug-in water pressure sensor. Now, if you have other ways of doing this, I'd love to know in the comments which way you would have done it. But other than that, I hope this is useful. Please do consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy this type of content. And yeah, I think I might go and do the other water tanks now with the same setup. Well, 2 out of the other 3, because the ball tank works perfectly, but the other 2 could use an upgrade. So there's always room for improvement. That's the beauty of tech. But until then, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye for now.